Hi, sixth graders. I'm including this video to show you what you should highlight in your book. It's pretty simple. It's basically the bold words and some other things. And I'd like to also include the answers to the questions so that you could check your work at home. So the first question asks, how do you think the camel might be affected if it didn't have humps? Well, this talked to you about the humps not being water, but being fat, and that the camel uses it sort of like a food reserve, sort of like a packed lunch. So we thought in class that the camel would have to eat more often. Maybe it couldn't go on as long of across the desert because it wouldn't have that storage of food. You can see that I highlighted the definition of an element and a compound. This is a review. Since we kind of went to cells, the students picked to go to cells before we did chemistry. This was supposed to be just a slight reminder, but since it's not in any of the papers and you don't have to know this, I thought that would be okay. Some of us thought this was Michael Phelps here, which is why I included that video on the Google slide thing. You don't have to watch that, but so this one, an element, the smallest part of an element is an atom. You can't break it down anymore. If you have an element of carbon, an element of gold, an element of silver, no matter how many times you slice it up, it will still maintain the characteristics and properties of that substance. So it's always going to be the same color. It's always going to be able to conduct electricity. It'll always be have the same number of electrons and protons. So when we're looking here, I always draw my water molecules the other way with the hydrogen on the top. But this is an H2O. If you kind of want to go O, and here's two H's, so you can count 1, 2, 3. There are 3 atoms in that water molecule, and each of these is an atom. But when we come to compounds, when you think about water on Earth, water is between 70 and 75% water. You take a smaller and get to an ocean, smaller get to a lake, smaller maybe get to the puddle by your house, smaller a glass, smaller still a raindrop. What's the smallest part of water that we can actually still looks like water? And that would be a molecule. If we broke this down any smaller, we would have an atom of oxygen, and that's clearer gas, so it wouldn't look like water. Over here, name the elements in the molecule of carbon dioxide. Hopefully you know that that is what you exhale. I don't think that you see something that looks like this coming out. It's actually both of these gases, this gas is invisible, and it's so teeny tiny you wouldn't see it. But right here we see the atom of carbon. And it kind of says its name here, and oxygen. And there's 2, so it's dioxide. So we could just put a little plus there. I see carbon and oxygen. If you weren't sure, if you read this down here, carbon dioxide is a compound made of the elements carbon and oxygen. You can always find the answers to these questions in the content if you were to read those. So now I get it. I know that compounds form when 2 or more elements combine. So turn the page, take a look at what I highlighted here. Once again, it is the key idea that some of these groups of organic compounds, organic means you contain carbon, and living things need carbohydrates, need proteins and nucleic acid, and a certain amount of water. So we've probably heard of carbohydrates. You can see on the Google slides, I have a presentation or a picture of all the different diet plans that advertise that are supposed to be wonderful for you to stay healthy, and we have opposing views about what that is. As you read what exactly you need on the cellular level, unless you're trying to lose a lot of weight, your diet should basically be a balance of good foods, and you should be working and moving and doing things like that to stay healthy. So we highlighted what a carbohydrate was here. It's energy rich, once again, organic compounds, and it lists the elements that make it up. Over here, lipids, compounds that are mostly made of, once again, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They contain more energy than carbohydrates do. Proteins, once again, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and in some cases sulfur. And there's another bold word here about enzymes, and they speed up chemical reactions. So over here, when you read what these are, then it asks you to classify these as a starch or a lipid. This is a lipid. And then it also says next to the label, write another example of a food or that contains starches and or lipids. So I'm just going to write maybe butter. This is a starch. And what else has starch is bread. And it's over here, it asks you the type of compound. Now, I kind of highlighted, right, though, so you could just go back up. Here's carbohydrates. You go here. It has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. A lipid up here, mostly made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Love is like oxygen. I showed them a weird video of somebody singing that. And then proteins, we have right here, we've already highlighted. It's a bold word. I can just kind of sit here and go up here and refer to the material. And I see carbon again, because they are organic. I see hydrogen again. I see oxygen again, and nitrogen, and there's also sulfur in here. It does ask you what are their functions. So I am going to write are important. They are make up cell parts. Right here, carbohydrates are important components of cell parts. They also store excess energy. If you watch the Michael Phelps video, you can see how much he eats because of how much energy he needs. I don't think we need to eat that amount because we don't use that amount of energy. So over here, lipids, they make the cell membrane. And they also contain energy, actually more energy than the carbohydrates do, right here. And then proteins here that are, they help with the structure and function of the cell. I'm just going to go up here. Much of the cell structure and function depends on proteins, and they form the cell's membrane. So on the cellular level, you can see if you consume these types of foods that it does help you. A parrot's beak, feathers, and claws are made of proteins. What part of your body most likely consists of proteins similar to those of a parrot's claws? Well, what do you think? I'm going to say like maybe our toenails or fingernails. The nucleic acid here are these molecules consist of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Again, you're seeing the same types of elements. I'm going to highlight nitrogen here and a little bit of phosphorus because it is an acid. This DNA, this nucleic acid, actually directs the cell's functions. That's a little bit of extra stuff that I saw. So down here, we look at both a bacterial cell, small, and an animal cell, and most cells contain the same compounds. The graph compares percentages of some of those compounds found in bacteria and an animal cell. Write a title for the graph and answer the questions below. I'm going to say, let's see, I'm going to make something us versus them. Although that doesn't really tell us what the thing is about, but us and them being the bacteria. Put a check mark above the bar that shows the percentage of water in an animal cell. The animal is blue. Down here it says water, so I'm going to put a check mark above there because it asks me to. How does this number compare to the percentage of water in a bacterial cell? And I'm just going to say that it's the same. The proteins or nucleic acid make up a larger percentage of an animal cell. So I'm going to go here and here. Clearly it's proteins because we're the blue in an animal cell and we have hardly any nucleic acid. So I'm going to say proteins. And then in general, how do you think a bacterial cell and an animal cell compare in their chemical composition? They are almost identical, I think, anyway. It's kind of weird that we're the same as bacteria. All right, I'm looking at the time because I don't want it to take a lot of time to download. Okay, so water, very important that you drink water every single day, something. About 2/3 of the human body, wow, 2/3 of you is actually water. Complete and label and circle the graph. You can see here that they kind of colored in 2/3 of this kid. If I then ask you to complete the graph, if I thought of this as a clock with 12 hours, 12 divided by 3 is 4, so every 4 hours. So I'm going to go from 12 to 4 and to 8, and then I just want to shade that in. You could put water drops, but this is how much of your body is actually water. But it's just kind of mixed in all over. It's not like that you are like a fish tank. An organic compound that contains only the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen is mostly like, now if you go back over and read what we highlighted, you should be able to see that it's probably carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It's probably either carbohydrate or lipid, but we only have the carbohydrate and protein, so I'm going to do carbohydrates, and I'm going to say proteins contain nitrogen. Which groups of organic compounds found in living things are not energy rich? All I did was come over. I see carbohydrates are energy rich. I see the word energy and lipids, but I'm looking over here and it just seems like that it contains much structure and function, chemical reactions. Doesn't really say, so I'm going to go ahead and say proteins. Wonder over here contain instructions, and they might want you to go ahead and put the nucleic acids, but I'm just writing proteins. What is the function of DNA? We kind of went ahead and directs a cell's functions, right? Describe ways the lack of water could affect the cell's functions. If you go up here, a cell could lose its shape. Like I say, and lose its shape and lose control of its temp. Now, that whole thing took us about 15 minutes. Now I know that important compounds in living things include, and they would want you to write the proteins, carbs, nucleic acid, and lipids. Okay, so double check, make sure you have those answers in there that you kind of, after you read it, that then when you answered the questions, that information went through your head a second time. Hopefully when you're highlighting when I said it's a third time. Maybe looking at my weird Google slideshow will have it go through a fourth time. If you have any questions, let me know. Email me. Bye. Board's still running here, right? That's run.